I've heard a lot of stories about what goes on in war, but none of them compare to what I heard from my friend, who was a war correspondent on the front lines. It was the summer of 2003, and my friend was sent to Iraq to cover the war. He sent me many letters and photos, but one letter stood out from all the rest. In it, he told me a story he had heard from a soldier who had returned from a secret mission. The soldier said they had been sent to search for a missing platoon that had disappeared without a trace. They searched for days in the scorching desert heat, and just when they were about to give up, they stumbled upon a small village hidden in the hills. The soldier said the village was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The buildings were old and crumbling, and the people who lived there were dressed in tattered clothes and looked like they hadn't seen civilization in years. The soldiers were greeted with suspicion, but after some negotiations, they were allowed to stay the night. That's when things started to get weird. The soldier said that in the middle of the night, he was awoken by strange noises outside his tent. When he went outside to investigate, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The villagers were performing some kind of ritual, and in the center of it was the missing platoon. They were tied up and being sacrificed one by one to some kind of dark entity. The soldier said he couldn't believe what he was seeing, but he knew he had to act fast. He managed to free some of the soldiers, and they fought their way out of the village. But the soldier said he couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled upon something ancient and evil that had been waiting for them to arrive. My friend's letter ended there, and I never heard from him again. But a few months later, I received a package in the mail. Inside was a journal that my friend had kept during his time in Iraq. The journal contained more details about the village and the dark entity that the soldiers had encountered. According to the journal, the village had been abandoned for years, and the villagers had been left to their own devices. They had turned to dark rituals and sacrifices as a way to appease the entity that they believed lived in the hills. The entity was described as a being of immense power and malevolence, capable of manipulating reality itself. My friend wrote that the soldiers who had been sacrificed had been transformed into something inhuman, something that he couldn't quite describe. But that was only the beginning of the horror. As my friend continued to investigate, he discovered that the entity had been worshipped by the villagers for centuries. It was said to be a god of death and destruction, who demanded sacrifice in exchange for power. The more my friend learned, the more he realized that the entity was not something that could be destroyed. It was too powerful, too ancient. It had been around long before humans, and it would be around long after. My friend's journal became more and more erratic as he delved deeper into the mystery of the entity. He wrote about strange dreams and hallucinations, about feeling like he was being watched even when he was alone. And then, one day, the journal abruptly ended. There was no explanation, no reason given for why my friend had stopped writing. I tried to reach out to him, but he never responded. Years passed, and I eventually forgot about my friend's story. But then, one night, I was awoken by a strange sound outside my window. When I looked outside, I saw something that made my heart stop. In the darkness, I could see a figure, standing in the shadows. It was tall and thin, with long arms and fingers that seemed to stretch on forever. Its face was hidden in the darkness, but I could sense that it was watching me. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but then the figure began to move. It stepped out of the shadows and into the moonlight, and that's when I saw its face. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. Its eyes were black pits that seemed to suck in all the light around them. Its mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin, revealing razor-sharp teeth that glinted in the moonlight. I wanted to run, to scream for help, but my body was frozen in terror. I could feel the entity's presence, its malevolent energy seeping into my very being. Suddenly, the entity spoke. Its voice was like nails on a chalkboard, grating and harsh. It said just one word, sacrifice. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew that I had to get away. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop until I was safe inside my house, with the doors and windows locked tight. I don't know if what I saw that night was real or just a nightmare, but I do know that it has stayed with me ever since. And now, every time I hear a strange noise outside my window, I can't help but wonder if the entity has returned, seeking another sacrifice. So if you ever find yourself in the hills of Iraq, be careful. The entity is still out there, waiting for its next victim. And once it has you in its grasp, there's no escape.